and I'm lucky to be here. My guitar shrunk. I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Everybody, down in my heart, down in my heart. I've got that joy, 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 joy down in my heart to stay. Joy to the world, all the boys and girls. Joy to the fishes and the deep blue sea. Joy to you and me. Joy to you and me. Go ahead. Joy to you and me. Oh, what's joy got to do? Got to do with it. So that's my talk title for today. What's joy got to do with it? That was a great song. So Randy had invited me to play with him this week, which I always enjoy doing when I can. But my week kind of got crazy. So by the time I got to look at that song, I thought, they don't need me, man. They'll rock it, And so that was a great job. So the other day, I was walking. I guess it was this past week. I was walking through my neighborhood. This was before that 2-day haboob that we had. It was early in the morning, and it was just beautiful. It's almost like the trees are blooming and flowering more than I ever remember. Anybody feel that too? I don't know if it's like a cycle that we're having or something, but like my red-tip photinia that is always red now, it's not red right now. It's blooming all these beautiful flowers. My pyracantha is blooming. Well, I wish it didn't. And everything's just beautiful, and all the trees were blooming, and I could smell all the different things. I could smell the dogwood and the Mexican elderflowers. It was just beautiful. And then the birds were like a cacophony. I call them the tabernacle choir. They were just beautiful, and so many different sounds, and those crazy mockingbirds, every little sound. So I was singing along with them, and it was so much fun. And I thought, I know that they're singing, they're looking for mates, and they're showing what their territory is. But to myself, for just a moment, I thought, that's just joy. I'm going to pretend that they're singing for the joy of singing. And it really felt like that. I mean, it really was like all creation. That's why I love that song that Mary Lynn starts out with. It's a new day. It's a new day. The world's made of soft clay, recreation, spring, and everything. It was just incredible. And so, I was walking along, and I was at that moment. I said, I'm really feeling joyful right now. I'm feeling very centered in what I'm doing right now, what I'm presently doing. I'm just walking through my neighborhood and looking at spring, and it kind of made me think of Eckhart Tolle. Do you all know him? Fantastic author. Wrote The Power of Now. Wrote The New Earth, and I've been following his teachings for many years. And when he was 29, he was going through a real existential crisis. And he'd been feeling suicidal. He'd been very depressed on and off his entire life. He said for going up to 30 years, he had been very, very depressed. And one night in particular, he was in his room, and he said that even the shadows looked like enemies. And there was this impending, this doom. He just couldn't shake it. And the furniture looked different. Even the bed looked menacing. And so he was really upset. And all of a sudden, he just felt like he was being drawn into this vortex. And he felt like he was really going crazy. And so he said to himself, he heard a voice that said, I can no longer live with myself. And by examining what he said to himself, he said, who's myself? Is there another self? Boom, this big light goes on in the dark in his head. And all of a sudden he realized, I can no longer live with myself. That self, I can no longer live with myself. So that just blew his mind, and it kind of split his way of thinking. And so that night he was finally able to go to sleep. He said he felt like he was being drawn into this huge void, this big vortex, this cyclone. And he doesn't remember anything after that until he woke up the next morning and he heard the birds chirping. He said he'd never heard birds chirping like that ever before. He could hear every single bird. He could separate each little song, kind of like I was doing the other morning. And then he looked around his room and he got up the pencil. He started crying when he saw the pencil. It was so beautiful. He's like, what pencil? He wasn't even on drugs. He was just like present, man. And so he was looking at everything in a completely new way. And he had become a new person by releasing and letting go of his self, of that clinging, of that constant pain that he had been clinging to for all those many years. So for the next 5 months, he literally sat, he was living in, I think he was in California at that point, and he sat on a bench, on park benches for 5 months and just smiled, Of course, us when we see that, better walk away. There must be something wrong with that guy. But the Buddha went through the same thing. The Buddha he spent 6 years, to make a long story short, he spent 6 years going to every guru, every spiritual leader, everything he could possibly find, trying to find enlightenment. He's like, we'll find enlightenment, I'll find enlightenment. And the Buddha had left his life behind. He left his wife behind. He left his palace behind. He left his kingdom behind. He left his kids behind. He was looking for enlightenment. And he was so frustrated and so angry and upset, just down. So he sat by this Bodhi tree for, I think it was 6 months. Just sat by this Bodhi tree. And he finally said, forget it. I'm not going to do enlightenment. Enlightenment doesn't even exist. I'm not even going to worry about it. And when he did that, all of a sudden he woke up. He said, oh, wait a minute, once he let go of that struggle, then he was able to go into this sense of wonderment. And he said the same thing. Every color looked brand new. Even the sky looked new. Every sound sounded new. And so he suddenly realized that enlightenment was where? Within. He had been looking up the wrong tree, so to speak. So he spent the next 40 years training other people on how to access that enlightenment, to how to find that inner joy. That was such a beautiful reading that you chose. That's exactly what it was talking about too. And so he found a way to let go. And so I'm going to tell you a story, and stay with me. It might sound like a dark story, but there's a redemption at the end. My approach to joy is through the dark side, kind of like that. What's his name? Yeah, Darth Vader. Because I have found joy through soul mining, through struggle, through loss, and through grief, and through pain, like Eckhart Tolle did, like the Buddha did. So there are many of us that find this. This story, the writer Andrew Solomon, I don't know if you've read anything by him. If you haven't, he's a wonderful writer, kind of on the spiritual bent, very smart guy. I heard this story maybe back in 2005, and it stayed with me this whole time. He was writing a book on depression. Nice subject, right? And so he'd been talking to all these different people about depression, and he realized that these people, they were like him. They were middle-class people. They were doing okay, and their depression centered around not being able to find a good nanny, or not having the right psychotropic drugs or things. He said, what he learned about depression is universal. I don't know if you know this, but it's universal in every single culture. So he went to the Inuit of Greenland. He went to Senegal. He went to Herzegovina and Sarajevo, and he was looking at these people who had been through incredible trauma. And he ended up in Cambodia after the whole Pol Pot, Khmer Rouge regime and massacre of that entire country. And so he was there, and these people kept saying, you have to talk to this woman. Fali Nuan was her name. And if you want to take notes, I noticed it's fantastic in there. You have this little note-taking. How long have you had that? I never seen it. Right on the outside of the program. Not very organized. So they said, you have to talk to this little woman, Fali Nuan. And he said, and he finally found her, and he called her up. He said, can I talk to you about what you went through and what you've been doing to help women? And she said, sure. And so he met her outside of this little newspaper in Phnom Penh. And he said, tell me what you went through during the Khmer Rouge. And he said she's like 4 foot tall, black hair pulled back. And he said, like all the people he met in Cambodia, they had this flightiness to them, this constant flickering, as most people who go through a lot of trauma do. And so she said, oh, I didn't have it so bad, really. And of course, by the end, he said, you didn't have it so bad. What are you talking about? You had it terrible. But she said, no, I didn't have it as bad as some other people did. She was a secretary and for the finance minister of Cambodia. This was just prior to the Khmer Rouge taking over. And so she had been, kind of middle class. She was considered an intellectual because if you had any education, you were considered an intellectual. So when Pol Pot and his people came, they were all killed, just summarily massacred because they had an education, because they could think for themselves. They were just shot right there, or they were sent to the killing fields. And so she was there, and she pretended to be a peasant woman. She pretended to be, not very literate or educated, so she survived. And so they got her husband, but they got her, and she had a 12-year-old daughter, and she had a 6-year-old son and an infant boy. And so they sent her to a re-education camp, that's what they call them. So along the way, they stopped, and so she was tied to a tree. She was forced to watch her 12-year-old daughter raped and killed. And they sent her off to that camp, and she was there for about 2 years, and she was plowing in the fields. And somebody decided to report her and say that she was involved, that she was an intellectual. And so they said, oh, time to go to the killing fields. And so they sent her off to the killing fields, and they tied her legs to this bamboo stake over this ravine, that if she relaxed at all, she'd fall off. And they tied both of her children to her, okay? And so her children are all crying, her kids are crying, and I've got to do something, she says. And so she decides to tell that soldier, she said, I was so-and-so's mistress, some high-up guy that she just remembered his name. I was his mistress, and I don't think that he's going to want to know. If you kill me, then he's going to be really mad at you. And he said, well, I don't think you're telling the truth, but I'm going to let you go anyway. He said, there's the jungle. You better go into it, and if I see you again, well, you know. So she goes there, and she's in the jungle for 2 years, eating roots and grubs and that kind of thing. Anything just to survive with her 6-year-old boy and her infant by this point. Well, they're not eating the right food, of course, so her breast milk dries up, and so her little baby dies. And so this really does have a good ending, believe it or not. But stay with me. But so Pol Pot falls. He's finally thrown out and taken down. So she makes her way to Phnom Penh, and she runs into her husband. Her husband, by now, he'd been beaten so badly that he was what the term was a functional idiot. And so he was not able to even recognize her. And so she was put into this resettlement camp by foreign aid workers. And so she was there, and she looks around, she starts noticing all the women there, well, just pretty much everyone, but the women especially, were just lying on the floor. They weren't taking care of their kids, they weren't taking care of themselves, they weren't taking care of their tents. And so she says, we have to do something. And the aid workers say, well, we're trying to get some antidepressants, for these people. Yeah, it'll work. And so she says, I have to do something. And so she starts talking to these women, and she says, finally, just some intuition that she had. She says, I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to teach these women 3 things. I'm going to teach them how to forget, first of all. In other words, how to let go of the past, how to no longer live in that emotional, chemical state of their trauma. They'd gone through some serious trauma. Then I'm going to teach them how to work. And she said, even if that means cleaning up their tent, even if that means cleaning up their hut or sweeping or washing their kids, at least they'll have something to do, because part of joy is to feel useful. Part of joy is to have a purpose. And so she teaches them that. And the third thing she knew she had to teach them was how to do manicures and pedicures. Cliche, right? Asian women, pedicures, okay. So he said that whenever she said that, he had to stifle his laugh, because he was about to laugh, and he thought, no, she's serious. And she said, why did you teach them pedicures and manicures? She said, because the Pol Pot regime had turned half the country against the other half. Nobody trusted anyone. Your neighbor could turn you in, make up something for the drop of a hat, and you'd be off to the killing fields. So she said, I'm going to teach them how to do that. And by doing that, she had them, they were touching each other. They were touching each other's fingers and toes. She said, if I had told them, hold each other's hands, they wouldn't have done it. They couldn't have done it. It wasn't in their disposition to be able to do it. So they were touching each other's, they were giving each other's manicures, and she, in her tent, in her hut, she made this room full of steam. So pretty soon, all the women were all laughing and giggling, and they were finally starting to look each other in the eye, which they hadn't been able to. And so she taught this for many years to a lot of different people, to a lot of different women. They were able to let go of the past, to be in the present, to reclaim some sense of trust, of connection. And she said, these three things are not separate. They're really part of the same way of living. And so after that, she formed an orphanage called the Future Life Orphanage. Because, of course, in Cambodia, many kids were just wandering around. They wandered around the streets. They'd lost both their parents, or they had been separated from them. So all these women stayed with her. They said, we don't want to go anywhere. We want to stay with you, because she was this life force who decided something had to be done. And so she was the one that did that. And so to this day, they still have that orphanage. And so the author, and Andrew Solomon, was kind of blown away by this. And so it refocused his book on depression to how to find joy. So where does joy exist? Anybody? Within? Okay, good. You get an A. What's the opposite of joy? Well, the nice thing about joy, it doesn't have an opposite. There is no opposite to joy. If you read Ernest Holmes, he talks about joy constantly. He uses that word so often, and it's because joy is our natural state of existence, and that is a mind blower. Joy is our natural state of being. But I like to think that what happens is that our windshields of how to see joy become tarnished, much like if you drive through parts of East Texas and, you get that mud, that deep red mud just caked on your windshield. So some people, some of us, won't say any names, maybe me, but no. When we go through pain, when we go through any kind of suffering, we become addicted to those emotions. And the way that we become addicted to those is our body thinks that that's our natural state of being. So when you try to sit still and you try to find joy and you try to think about joy, the body will say, wait, no. That's not us. That's not us. We're the sufferer. We're the angry person. We're the person in pain. But the cool thing about getting out of this addiction to those emotions is you get freedom. And freedom really is just, in my experience and from what I've read, the equivalent of joy, because joy is freedom. When I was listening to those birds, just singing their little heads off, and I was thinking, they're happy, they're joyful, they're doing exactly what they want to be doing in this very moment. Memory without emotional charge is called wisdom. Isn't that a great line? I borrowed it, but memory without emotional charge is called wisdom. So often when we think about joy, we're thinking that it's pleasure or that it's happiness. But in reality, pleasure is always derived from something outside of you, whereas joy, like I said, is from within you, or like you all said, because you're smart. Happiness, it said, is an inch deep and a mile wide. And joy is a mile wide and a mile deep. Joy is a mile wide and a mile deep. So it's not joy that makes us grateful, but it's gratitude that makes us joyful. And we all know about gratitude, right? Because we all live in gratitude every single day. And when you look back at the people who went through what they went through in Cambodia, Herzegovina, Senegal, so many different places. We have so many reasons to be joyful, but even in those places, you find what I call little joys. You find small joys. Myself, I celebrate small joys. When I get a parking space, when I go into the post office and there's only one person in front of me, I'm like, yes, I just radiate this, people, what's wrong with you? I'm happy. Those little joys I've come to really, really count on. When I'm driving across the country and I'm getting good gas mileage, I'm happy for the smallest things. C.S. Lewis said in his book, Surprised by Joy, which is a great book, I've read it, he says, all joy reminds it is never a possession, always a desire for something longer ago or further away or still about to be. So in her book, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown, she talks about this concept of foreboding joy. Does anyone know what that is? When you have foreboding joy, it's like, you're almost afraid to step into joy because sure enough, the other shoe is going to drop, the other thing is going to happen. So it's the sense that we don't deserve joy, that we don't deserve to be happy because something will happen. Some of us, it's guilt that we carry over from maybe our childhood or maybe the religion that we were part of when we were children. Maybe there's guilt about like a lack of self-worth. And so we're not able to step into that joy. That's a really great read, though, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown. I really enjoyed that book a lot, too. But the thing about joy that I find most remarkable and that this story highlights of the women in Cambodia, it's a shared experience, isn't it? It's a shared experience, and it comes from feeling useful, from feeling purposeful, even if it's something as simple as caring for your porch, caring for your car, caring for the way you look, caring for your body, caring for someone else. Those little things can break that paralyzed trauma that these women had. So she, in a lot of ways, she knew instinctively and intuitively that in order to find joy, you have to let go, first of all. Then you have to be present. That's the most important thing because that's where joy lives. Joy lives in the present. Joy doesn't live in the future. Well, it can, but it's not real. It's like, I'm going to be so happy when I win the Mega Lotto, Or I remember back then I was really joyful when I was 20 or that kind of thing. Joy doesn't live in any of those places. Joy only lives in the present. It only exists in the present. And we have to access that present. We access that present by letting go, by gratitude, of course, and by being still. By being still. When you're still, and if you know anything about meditation, the Tibetan character for meditation is called Gom. And what that means, the literal translation is to become familiar with. So they want you to become familiar with your thinking. So when you sit down and you say, I can't stop my brain, I have this crazy chatterbox brain, what's best to do is look at those thoughts. As you watch them go by, just like clouds or balloons or leaves on a stream, and you watch them go by, and then you ask yourself, who's doing the observing? Who's watching these thoughts? It's you. It's that inner being that you can only access through stillness. A Buddhist teaching says that suffering has the potential to deepen our compassion and understanding of the human condition. And in so doing, it can lead us to even greater faith, joy, and well-being. So some of us can access joy through compassion, through caring. I've been with people at hospice as they're making their final transition from this body, and I've seen joy. I've felt joy. I have felt a resigned dignity there. And nobody else would probably call that joyful, but I certainly have felt it so natural and thinking, what a gift, to make that transition so easily and to be able to watch people. So joy is a shared experience, and you can certainly share that with others. Ernest Holmes, he wrote, if we wish to come to the Spirit for the healing of our wounds, let us come in peace and with spontaneous joy. For the Spirit is joy, he says. For the Spirit is joy. So To end, I have 4 steps here, of course, because we need steps, because they help. They really help us. The only way that you change your current position, your current situation, is to learn, to acquire new knowledge. So ask yourself, is there joy, ease, and lightness in what I'm doing? And if there isn't, don't become anxious or guilty about it. Just look at it. Is there joy, ease, and lightness in what I'm doing? And the way to access that is, 1, focus on really doing whatever it is that you're doing, even more fully. Really give your attention to what you're doing. If you're washing dishes, give your attention to that. Really inhabit that. Breath, breathing, body, big part of it. Because do you know why we're always saying come into the body, pay attention to the breath when we teach meditation? It's because that automatically brings you into the present. When you become aware of your body, you're immediately in the present. So does breathing. Shine the light of your consciousness on whatever feeling that you're resisting. If there's something you're holding on to, say, where do I feel it? Do I feel it in my chest? Do I feel it in my solar plexus? Do I feel it in my stomach? Then it's probably fear. Shine the light of your consciousness. Negativity, it's very contagious and it blocks your inner joy. And nothing can survive the attention of your consciousness. Nothing can survive that is negative can survive the light of your consciousness. It's like walking through a super dark tunnel in foggy London maybe, and your consciousness is that flashlight. That's your consciousness. You shine that on whatever you're feeling that's negative, it will dissipate it. Go ahead and feel it fully. It's not going to kill you. I promise. And if it does, call me. Drop all the negativity about the situation. If you don't like a situation you're in, if you don't like your job, if you don't like some people at work, you either change it, you change your attitude towards it, or you just drop it. Just drop it like it's a hot coal. And finally, learn and practice tiny gratitude. That's what I do. The small, little tiny gratitudes and appreciation. The difference between gratitude and appreciation is gratitude is being thankful that something went well or the way that it did. Appreciation is simply acknowledging the good that is present. Present being the key word. Like I said, when you remember your password or a friend calls you hadn't heard from in a while. I'm always happy when that happens. So in the Science of Mind textbook, there's this long this affirmation that I say pretty much daily. I've kind of strung it together from, I forgot what the chapter is, but the part that sticks out to me, the one line, it says, everything necessary to the fullest expression of the most boundless experience of joy and happiness is now mine. Isn't that great? Everything necessary to the fullest expression of the most boundless experience of joy and happiness is now mine. And why wouldn't it be? Pearl Buck said it better. She said, to serve is beautiful, but only if it is done with joy and a whole heart. Isn't that lovely? So I'm going to end with this Dutch theologian, Henry Nouwen, wrote, he says, every day holds a surprise, but only if we can see, hear, or feel it when it comes to us. Let's not be afraid to receive each day's surprise. Whether it comes to us as sorrow or as joy, it will open a new place in our hearts. A place where we can welcome new friends and celebrate more fully our shared humanity. So give yourself some permission this upcoming week to experience joy, to feel joy, to appreciate joy, and to share it. And so it is. Thank you.